The Douglas Coleman Show is made possible with support from Seth David Radwell, a recent guest on the program and author of American Schism, How the Two Enlightenments Hold the Secret to Healing Our Nation, released this past July. As Publishers Weekly writes in its recent glowing book life review of American Schism, business executive Radwell's epic debut examines the historical influences that have led to what he sees as the collapse of politics in the United States. Seth Radwell makes the case that the current chasm between the American right and left can be traced back to the 18th century's Age of Enlightenment and the basic tenets of liberty, equality, and reason. American Schism provides a historical perspective that can help us fight today's unreason with reason and bridge current-day divides. American Schism by Seth David Radwell is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and wherever books are sold. For more information, go to AmericanSchismBook.com.
It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show.
Mr. Smooth and Savvy
is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous
and not so famous,
the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Lynette Rice. Hey, Lynette, how are you? Thanks for coming on the show.
It is my pleasure to chat with you.
So, let's see. You are editor-at-large at Entertainment Weekly. How long have you been doing that job?
My goodness. Oh, it's been over 20 years. I've been at the magazine for a long time. I've covered television. I've watched a lot of TV in that time. Lots of TV.
Now, is Entertainment Weekly, is that any affiliation to Entertainment Tonight, the show?
No affiliation whatsoever, although for the longest time my parents thought we were the magazine offshoot of the TV show. But no, we have nothing to do with Entertainment Tonight.
Okay, now is this a still in a print magazine format, or is it online, or both?
Yes, believe it or not, we're still making magazines. You know, we were owned for the longest time by Time Inc., which then became Time Warner, and now it's owned by Meredith. And now we're about to be taken over by Barry Diller's company, one of his subsidiary companies. But yes, we were a weekly for the longest time, ergo the title Entertainment Weekly. But you know, after Meredith took over, we became a monthly magazine. So we're a monthly called Entertainment Weekly, but we also have a website that's updated daily that's called Entertainment Weekly online.
And basically the topics of the magazine are celebrity, is it gossip or is it, what exactly is it?
No, we cover all of entertainment. We cover television, we cover film, we cover books, and we cover music. So which is basically our goal is to cover pop culture.
You've also written a book called How to Save a Life, which is about Grey's Anatomy. Now, why did you choose this? It says this is your first book that you wrote.
Right.
Why did you choose Grey's Anatomy as your first book?
Well, I got a random email one day at work from an editor of Crown Publishing at the time asking if I wanted to write about the show. And I said, sure, why not? You know, I thought, well, I always thought about would I write a book someday, but I always knew it would be nonfiction because I feel like I have no original thoughts. I write about everybody else. And so as I was putting the proposal together that goes out to the publishing companies, I even thought that who's going to read this? I mean, so much in the proposal was about old headlines that came out of the show, but there ended up being a bidding war for the book. I got a very generous advance, and so I just started trying to piece together the behind-the-scenes story of the making of this huge hit for ABC.
Okay, now when did the show start?
Oh my gosh, it started way back in 2005, so it's on its 18th season now. So that's a very long time. Longest running medical drama on a broadcast television.
Longer than General Hospital?
Well, that's daytime drama.
That's
a little
daytime.
bit of a different genre.
Okay.
And they also, they work a lot harder too, by golly. But they're a different beast.
Okay. Like I said at the beginning of the interview before we got on, I have not actually seen the show. I think I stopped watching television around 2005, and I was one of the original.
Now, why did you do that?
Why did I do that?
Why did you stop? Why did you give up TV? No one should give up TV.
Well, I think because YouTube was starting at that point, kind of in its infancy, and I saw the potential for on-demand then. And so I just switched over. I thought, oh, this is great. Because I have such a weird schedule that, I couldn't always watch what I wanted when I wanted. And to me, that was really more important. So I didn't like TiVo, and I couldn't figure out how to program the VCR to start recording. Remember those days? And
of course.
So I just sort of stopped, and I went online, and I've been there ever since.
There's so much on television now. Because of streaming and because there's so many streamers out there, there's such a variety of things to choose from, and you really can find. It's actually hard to zero in on one particular show, and that's what we try to do at Entertainment Weekly, is to try to help folks. We've always tried to help folks. This is the coolest show you want to watch right now, because there's so much to curate. But television has never been better, and so that actually kind of speaks to what's been so great about Grey's Anatomy. Is despite the fact that there's so many choices out there, so many, folks are still flocking to this little medical drama on ABC, which it was also helped, by the way, when Netflix started to run all reruns of the show. They stacked up all the previous seasons, so that brought on a whole new generation of viewers. So, Douglas, what I'm saying is there's still time for you to catch up to Grey's Anatomy.
I may have to take you up on that, especially after this interview.
Always time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about the show, and let's talk about your book. What can a reader expect to find? Obviously, if you're a fan of the show, they're going to love the book. But let's say if I picked it up and have never seen the show, am I going to read through it and go, huh? Or is it going to be interesting for me as well?
Well, I would like to think so. What people should expect is this isn't a typical right-through book. So it is structured as an oral history. So everyone who I interviewed, their quotes set the narrative. So the whole book is basically in the voices of everybody else, as if I gathered everybody on a stage and said, okay, let's talk about the show. Let's talk about moments of the show. So I stay out of the way and let them do the talking. I think somebody who's never watched the show, I think it could be interesting because the very first chapter sets up how the show was first made. The very first episode, how it was made, how they cast people, how those actors felt when they were cast, what it was like to work on the show, but also can give you an idea of what it's like as a writer or somebody on the crew to work on a show like this, which is not easy. And so all those voices basically tell the story of the show's beginnings. And then from there, I kind of break it down into themes, like, what it was like to deal with the fans. The fans of the show are crazy, and they're even crazier now because they're younger and they're even more invested. They're a different kind of fan. They're what we like to call stans, because they're really so invested, in the characters, in the romances and stuff. So I believe that you could still access this show with the book without having to know every little secret of every plot point on the drama.
Well, what might make more sense would be to read the book first and then maybe start watching the show, because then at least I would get the background of it. Otherwise, I'd probably have to start at episode 1, right?
Yeah, right. Yes. That actually would be a good thing, and And it's funny, when I started writing this, I watched Grey's Anatomy as, partly because I covered TV, but also because I was interested in the show. And I gave up on it probably, after like 12 seasons, because things get exhausting, and I have so much TV to watch. But what was fun with the book is when I was writing about specific moments during the show, like specific deaths, big deaths, it was fun to go back and watch the episodes and see it again. And I got all emotional all over again. It was great TV. So I think the book can definitely, curate classic moments for you. So in the event you didn't want to sit through 22 episodes, you can just fast forward now on Netflix.
I think that sounds like a plan. Let's hit a couple of your talking points here, because they sound very interesting. I'm just going to throw them out. First one, why the show became a magnet for bad publicity.
Well, so the good news about a show like Grey's Anatomy is that it did what television does best, and that's create stars. You don't cast famous people, you cast unknown people, and then with any luck, your show, will not only become a hit, but you'll also create stars. That's what Grey's Anatomy did. The problem is it became virtually an overnight success, and everybody was talking about the show. So that means every outlet that covered television was focusing on it, because we got great traffic on our websites, we sold magazines, and so we couldn't write enough about Grey's Anatomy. And as a result, I don't think the actors, no one really prepares you for that kind of attention. I mean, just like we're not wired to be criticized on social media. If somebody turns on us and there's like 100 different opinions of how you look or whatnot, well, times 100. And that's what it's like for a young actor on a big show like Grey's Anatomy. And I think it was hard for them to navigate. And as a result, they didn't always probably behave in the best way, because who could expect the kind of coverage that they got, And I remember early on, the star of the show is Ellen Pompeo. She's already a very slight woman, not a big gal. She's tiny, but in the second season in particular, she looked like she got even thinner. And you have to think it's because of stress, because she was working her butt off. They all were. And instantly the coverage changed to focus on how she looked and what kind of example was she setting for all her young viewers, which was really unfair. I mean, she's just a tiny woman, but it became a negative. And so to have to navigate that alone, I mean, that's just enormous. There's nothing that prepares you for that kind of scrutiny when you come into Hollywood and become an overnight star.
Oh, were people writing things like, "Oh, she's too thin," or "She's anorexic," or
too thin. How could she do this? How could she set this example for the young women who are watching the show? And she had to go on the defensive, say, this is my body, and it was her body. She ended up having a really great strategy to deal with the paparazzi too. She learned that whenever she was leaving her house, she made sure to wear the same black workout outfit, so the paparazzi wasn't interested in snapping her picture, because she wasn't wearing anything designer, she wasn't wearing anything interesting. There was just, everything was plain about her. So that kind of got the paparazzi off her back, which is really smart. And I can't imagine, but the paparazzi really followed all of them early on because they were huge.
The next one I wanted to cover here was the cancellation of Isaiah Washington and Katherine Hagel, and how it wouldn't happen post Me Too.
Right. Well, it's interesting talking about, these are two huge departures on the show, and it's interesting now looking at their departures through today's lens of the post-Me Too era. When you look at somebody like Katherine Heigl, and on the show she played an intern, named Izzy, and she was the first actor on the show to earn an Emmy. So she became big very quickly, and she was cast in movies. One of her more popular movies early on was a movie called Knocked Up. I don't know if you ever saw that. She was opposite Seth Rogen.
Oh, yeah.
And she got pregnant.
That I've seen.
Yes,
that I've seen.
Well, that happened while she was on Grey's Anatomy. She became a film star. I mean, this is the kind of career that you want, obviously. And she became more outspoken, too, about wanting to be a film star. But there was one moment during her time on Grey's early, somebody asked her if she was going to submit herself for another Emmy, and she made a comment that she didn't have the work that she didn't do the work that she felt like qualified for an Emmy. And this was coming after a season where her high point was like literally saving a deer. And that comment turned her into a diva, at least from the press perspective. And the coverage was intense. And suddenly she started looking like a privileged actress who got too big for her britches and was ungrateful for this incredible opportunity that was afforded her by ABC. And so the coverage got ugly and it got sexist. And ultimately, it kind of ate away at her relationship with the showrunner, who was Shonda Rhimes, so that ultimately led to her departure. And so I feel like if that happened now, I don't think she would have been so swiftly let go of on the show. And you look at it now, and it just seems so sexist how she got so much negative coverage simply because she was outspoken. The other big headline, the very first big headline that came out of the show, was by courtesy of an actor by the name of Isaiah Washington, who played an incredible character by the name of Preston Burke. He was one of the surgeons on the show. He got into a great relationship with one of the interns, played by Sandra Oh. He got into a tiff on the set with Patrick Dempsey, who had showed up a little late to the set. He got angry with him, and then during this brief argument, he dropped a homophobic slur, which ultimately, led to a scuffle. They had to shut down the set. Within 24 hours, they were taking sensitivity classes. Everything seemed okay until the Golden Globes a few weeks later, when they won a Golden Globe. And then Isaiah, he repeated the slur in the press room. He said, "No, I did not say this homophobic slur." By the way, the buried lead here is one of the other actors on the show, T.R. Knight, is gay, but he just hadn't come out by that point. So from that fight, he ended up coming out to People magazine and said, "Yes, in fact, I am gay. I hope that's not the narrative here." So it just kind of spawned this whole a snowball effect, which ended up casting a lot of negative light on the show, and ultimately had to let go of Isaiah. I think if that happened today, yes, I do think he still would be fired because there was no question it was piss poor behavior on his part on the set, and the fact that he made the decision to repeat it again in front of microphones, it's like, dude, what were you thinking? So of course, they did have to let go of him.
And actually, the whole cancel culture has gotten worse, I think, from the time that probably happened. How many years ago was that?
Oh my gosh! So that was only 2 years after the show had launched. So we're talking like 2007, 2008.
Oh yeah.
So yes, it would be a lot different. But I think it would be Katherine Heigl's situation. I believe would be handled differently. Even then, I wonder about Isaiah too. But it's what was most provocative about his situation was his career never really recovered after that. He did still find work, but nothing at the level of his role on Grey's Anatomy. And he was perfect at that role. And it was unfortunate because he's a great actor, but it never recovered. It never recovered. And as a result, he became kind of this interesting figure, especially on social media. During the Trump years, he was quite vocal on Twitter and would often spout conspiracy theories on his Twitter feed. He gained a huge, right wing following, but the things that he would say, it's like, who is this guy? And all I could wonder about the politics that he found was that maybe at one point in time, in Grace, he felt like he became a part of the disenfranchised part of Hollywood. So maybe he felt more comfortable joining the part of America that feels disenfranchised as well. In light of the left, I don't know. That's me trying to come up with some kind of answer for the things that he would say on Twitter.
Well, it's a good psychological theory, if nothing else. I mean,
I know. I've thought a lot about it, by golly, trying to understand while I would try to get him on the phone to get a quote for my book.
Let's do one more, and then we got to wrap it up here. How about the show's legacy and indelible mark on pop culture?
Well, here's a good quiz for you. Have you ever in your life said to anyone, "You're my person"? Have you said that, Douglas?
You're my person.
You're my person. Have you said that to anybody?
No.
Okay, that's okay. Well, hopefully a lot of people in your audience, one time or another, maybe have said that, and that phrase came from Grey's Anatomy. Okay. Just the lexicon alone from that show has cracked the zeitgeist and will live long after this show is gone from ABC. I mean, the fact that Shonda Rhimes is responsible for that is immeasurable. This is a show, and medical dramas will always be a part of television, especially long after we die. But what made this one special was that it also went into the personal lives of the doctors, and it was a sexy look at their personal lives, and it was serialized. So while you could turn on the show and learn some clever new, procedure they're doing in the OR, at the same time, you could also listen about, their divorce and how it didn't work out well with the gal they just hooked up with, down the hall in the other OR. And that made the whole thing so much fun. And so for that, Grey's Anatomy, Grey's Anatomy will be up there as the TV shows that we will all remember, along with Seinfeld, along with Friends, and along with ER.
I think there was a show like that in every decade, at least one. For the 70s, All in the Family would probably take that trophy, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we could go back all the way. I Love Lucy would be the 50s. The 60s I'd have to think about. But you were mentioning the lexicon, and you said, "You're my person." I've never said that one, but seriously is on here. That one I've said a lot.
Yes.
So
you have?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they've that would be like a whole page of dialogue in Grey's Anatomy. Like they would literally say, seriously? Seriously? Just different tone. That would be a page.
Yeah.
And the fans would love it. There's so many examples of that too. Have you ever heard I hope it don't make you blush. Have you ever heard the word vajayjay?
No.
Well, they had to come up with a word for vagina because the network didn't want them to say vagina in a medical drama, despite the fact that they said the word penis several times. So Shonda Rhimes went to her writer's room and said, "Okay, kids, got to come up with another word for vagina." And there was a young woman in there who says, "Well, my girlfriends and I, we called our vajayjay," which actually sounds nastier, but that was okay. So now the JJ is a part of the American lexicon, thanks to Grey's Anatomy. So there you go. So at dinner tonight, I want you to bring up the word vajayjay with whoever you're with and see how it lands.
Yeah, I'll do that. And in fact, it sounds like one of those mispronounced words of a 2-year-old.
Correct.
When they're just starting
really
to figure
funny.
things out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a funny word. It does sound nastier than vagina, but because of that, an uptight person in standards and practices, they couldn't say vagina, which is so absurd. It's so absurd.
Oh,
the book has a lot of examples of that, things that they couldn't get away with. Perhaps a medical instrument looked too phallic, so the network wanted it off the show. I mean, dumb moments like that, which happen on every TV show.
Yeah, it's true. Well, Lynette, we do have to wrap this up. My guest is Lynette Rice. Her book is called How to Save a Life. It's all about Grey's Anatomy. Do you have a website that you want to give out for the book?
You can buy this on Amazon.com. Just search How to Save a Life by Lynette Rice, and it's a New York Times bestseller. So that should just drive you right away to Amazon to order the book. You can also find it at Barnes & Noble. Okay, super. Well, thanks so much for coming on and enlightening me about Grey's Anatomy. And I think I will... it was my pleasure. Take an interest in it now. Okay, Lynette. That would be good. Thanks again. Take care. Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on the Douglas Coleman Show.
We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
Douglas Coleman's Don't Do a Podcast is a dryly humorous rant about Douglas's pet peeve, the unrelenting torrent of podcasts hitting the web on a constant basis. As technology has put podcasting within the reach of anyone, many wholly unqualified people have taken the plunge. This witty polemic tries to persuade them from broadcasting their drivel using Douglas's brand of sarcastic humor. Now on Amazon, only 99 cents.
DJC Music and DJC Productions are pleased to announce a brand new website. We have started a listing website for radio show hosts as well as potential show guests. This is a meeting site where hosts and guests can come together. Show hosts can list their show and types of guests they're interested in booking. Potential guests can list their talents, bio, accomplishments, or anything they feel makes them an interesting radio show guest. There are no recurrent payments, only a one-time $5 listing fee. Your listing will stay up until you decide to cancel. Previous guests of The Douglas Coleman Show are welcome to submit their guest listing free of charge. Go to radiohostsandguests.com. That's radiohostsandguests.com.
Are you an independent musician? How would you like to have your songs played on hundreds of radio stations just like the one you're listening to right now? Join MusicSubmit.com and we'll promote your music to radio stations and blogs in your genre. It's free to set up your account, and we guarantee your music will be considered for airplay by radio stations worldwide. Why not sign up today? It's free. MusicSubmit.com. Radio promotion for indie musicians.
Hey, this is Ray Powers. Don't touch anything. You've got it right where you need it. Tuned in to the Douglas Coleman Show. You heard me.
All right, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Collin O'Mara. Hey, Collin, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on today.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it. First thing I got to ask you is you were at the, do you pronounce it COP or COP?
No, the COP, and actually I was supposed to go, but because the Democratic package was still on the floor of the U.S. House for infrastructure, I ended up staying behind to help get the last couple of votes, which before it passed at midnight on Friday. So my team's been on the ground there, and so I've been keeping constant track of everything happening. But I stayed behind to try to help get that infrastructure package passed.
Well, so just so people know who you are the president and CEO of the National Wildlife Federation, right?
Absolutely. Yep. And we're America's largest conservation organization. We got about 6 million members across the country, 52 state and territorial affiliates, and we're a true federation in that our affiliates that are in every single state help set our policy and do our work together. So we're trying to bring folks together to help ensure we have healthy natural resources and healthy communities.
See, I just learned something today because I thought that the National Wildlife Federation was a government agency. But you're not, right?
No, we're a nonprofit. We were actually founded in some ways by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He brought together a conference to try to bring together conservation leaders and folks in forestry and farming and sportsmen and early birding societies all together to Washington in 1936. And at the end of the conference, and the goal of the conference was to try to figure out how to save a lot of wildlife species that are, I think, brink of extinction then during the height of the Depression. And at the end of the conference, the group came together and they said we should actually form an organization. And that's how the National Wildlife Federation was born.
Was he piggybacking on Teddy Roosevelt? Because I know Teddy was very big into conservation and set aside millions of acres for government land.
Yeah, and I think it's funny. Franklin Roosevelt always, actually, when people ask him his profession, or if you look at like his taxes or other documents, he often wrote forester, and so he was a kind of a lifelong ornithologist. He grew up studying birds. You go to Hyde Park, you'll see all these kind of bird specimens that he collected in his youth, and he basically started testing ideas like reforestation and restoration of wetlands, as well as things like the Civilian Conservation Corps when he was governor of New York. And then he took a lot of those ideas with him into the White House, and they became cornerstones of the New Deal. But in terms of acres, especially in terms of investment in like restoration and in the restoration of natural resources and our recreation amenities, or national parks and the like, some could easily argue he's the greatest, if not just one of the greatest conservation presidents in our history.
Now, I always found it a little ironic that conservation had the component of hunting in it as part of the deal, because Teddy Roosevelt killed a lot of animals. I mean, I've seen the safari that he went on in Africa, and he killed all kinds of things. Is that actually a valid component for wildlife conservation, to hunt?
I think if it's done to ensure kind of healthy management levels, then it can be. There's also places where it's been abused, of course, and obviously we've taken things like passenger pigeons that were kind of shot out of the sky by commercial hunting for activities for things for sale. And so in the U.S. at this point, you can't really hunt for profit. The kind of number of species that you can take, whether deer or ducks or turkeys, are all very tightly regulated by the states. And so if it's well managed and doesn't affect the overall population of the species, particularly for things like deer that tend to be everywhere on the East Coast in particular, it can be done in a way that is completely compatible with conservation. And till this day, for the last 80 years, the way that we fund a lot of the habitat restoration in this country is actually excise taxes on sportsmen and sportswomen, whether they're hunting or fishing, and then their equipment. So they're integrally linked. And if it's scientifically managed and kind of professionally managed without poaching, they can be compatible.
Well, I know that the indigenous peoples, particularly in Alaska, have a different set of rules in terms of hunting. Like, they're allowed to hunt seals, but they use them for survival. I mean, they're not really doing it for profit. They do it to eat.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there are kind of cooperative agreements between NOAA, the federal agency that oversees marine mammal protections, and a lot of native villages and native tribes to make sure that those, like you said, they kind of for sustenance, for food, those kind of traditional activities, those both have both spiritual and kind of a nutritional component to them, are allowed to be done in kind of sustainable ways. And most folks that hunt in the U.S. are primarily hunting food that they also for game that they also eat. And so we do see that. I mean, it's a little different than some of the hunting overseas that you see, some like the trophy hunting they call it.
Trophy hunting, right.
But most deer hunters, most deer hunters and duck hunters actually do harvest the meat and then eat it. And it's in most cases a pretty remarkable, healthy source of protein. I hunt occasionally, and I always make sure that we eat everything we possibly can, and be responsible and respectful of the sacrifice.
Now let's shift this a little bit. You had mentioned that you were working towards getting that big spending bill passed that went through, and did President Biden sign it as of yet?
Not yet. So it passed there's two pieces. There's what they call the bipartisan infrastructure package. This is roads and bridges and water infrastructure and a lot around resilience and broadband, and so that piece passed the Senate about 4 months ago. It passed the House of Representatives on Friday night into Saturday morning, and the president's going to sign it next week. He wanted it. Congress is out of session this week, so a lot of the members that had helped author it wanted to be there for the signing ceremony, so he agreed. And then the second package, what they call the Build Back Better Act, is the one that has $555 billion of climate investments. It's got some things in like the care economy related to healthcare and to the child tax credit and other pieces to try to support families And so that hasn't passed yet. That's the thing that the House will vote on next week when they return.
Okay, how is that relevant to your work?
So one of the greatest threats facing wildlife is climate change. I mean, the kind of the two major drivers we see are massive loss of habitat as we develop more and cut more streets and pave over more things, and then also kind of climate that is driving hotter temperatures, in many cases, kind of extreme weather events like massive flooding or fires, or in some cases prolonged drought. That have a pretty pronounced impact on the wildlife species we care about. So right now, about 1 in 3 different species in the U.S. are at heightened risk of extinction, and about 12,000 species that we're particularly concerned about. And so we get involved heavily to make sure that there are investments in things like what we call our natural infrastructure. So restoring our forests and restoring our wetlands and grasslands that have huge wildlife values, but they also make communities safer. If communities have healthy wetlands, they can weather no pun intended, they can weather the a hurricane better because you'll have more places to absorb the water, so it doesn't flood out everybody. And so we work really hard on big investments on coastal resilience and drought resilience and forest restoration and wetland restoration. Things like wildlife crossings across highways that are going to be built, making sure that we're not separating for kind of how wildlife where they eat and where they spend different times of the year as they migrate. And so there's about $40 billion worth of investments in the bipartisan package that are really important for wildlife, in addition to another about $60 billion of investments for our water infrastructure, which obviously is important to have clean water. So we're pretty optimistic, but we get involved to make sure that kind of communities and people and wildlife have a voice at the table.
We had talked about the COP26 summit it was in Scotland, right? And
yep,
you said that you were going to go, but you didn't go. What was the agenda there? I mean, there were world leaders from all over the place there, but I was a little unsure exactly what the agenda was for this particular meeting.
Yeah, I mean, the aspiration was that all the governments of the world would come together to kind of affirm their individual national commitments to ensure that the planet doesn't reach more than 1.5 degrees centigrade temperature increase by 2050. And so the U.S. made their commitments that President Biden made about 8 months ago, where he said that we were going to reduce emissions by 50 to 52% by 2030, and that's from a 2005 baseline. And so that was our commitment. The European Union has similar commitments. China and India and some of the other more developing economies have less aggressive targets, just given their economic trajectory. And the goal was to have those commitments become more kind of like binding actions, and having people kind of put kind of pen to paper for how they're going to achieve the goal. So not just set a number, but really be very clear about the way in which the work is going to get done. And so the president really hoped to go with the Build Back Better plan that has a lot of the climate investments in hand. Unfortunately, didn't pass before it, but countries came with a lot of their either investments or legislation they passed it or actions that their governments have taken. But the challenge that we're facing right now is that China did not really show up to the conference in a meaningful way. Their president chose not to attend. He didn't even send a video. They sent a fairly low-level delegation. And at this point, even though the U.S. is the largest emitter historically, China is by far the largest emitter today. And so it's very hard to achieve the global numbers that we need to achieve without China playing a bigger and bigger role. And so a lot of the conversations were really about how to talk about different ways to engage China and some other countries like Russia, who also didn't attend. Try to engage them in ways that Vladimir Putin didn't attend. Engage them in ways that will help create conditions where they want to reduce faster for the sake of the entire world.
Well, how do we get China involved? I mean, they seem to have their own agenda, at least politically and economically, and are less interested in, playing in the sandbox with everyone else. How do we get them to to engage more with this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the greatest policy levers that can be pulled is actually on trade. China's economy is largely fueled by the export of manufactured goods and industrial goods. And so one of the innovative things that came out of the first day of the session was an agreement that President Biden struck with the European Union that basically says over the next few years, they're going to start having some of the tariffs related to steel production connected to the amount of carbon emitted in their manufacturing, in the processing. And what that'll do is it'll give American plants that tend to have more modern pollution controls than some of the European plants in places like Germany and Poland and other parts of kind of Northern Europe a bit of a leg up, because they have a lot fewer emissions. They tend to be slightly higher quality than some of the others. And so I do think trade is one of the levers. I think that also the diplomacy. I mean, there's still dependency of the Chinese government on different types of technologies they buy from other countries. And so, even though the biggest opportunity is probably at the point of purchase of the things they export, I think also using the leverage from things they import is going to be important. But unfortunately, my read, at least at this point, is that the greatest levers to do exactly what you're talking about are going to be more economic than they are kind of political.
That's probably true. I think I would agree with you on that. There's a term that I hear a lot, carbon net zero. Is that something that we are working towards at this point? Is that part of this conference? And is it really attainable?
It's like the goal is to achieve kind of net zero emissions domestically, no later than 2050, hopefully closer to 2040. The goal internationally is by doing it no later than 2050. And the idea of, and again, the net language is always, I feel like it's kind of insider talk, but the idea is that you reduce everything you possibly can. So you convert as much to clean energy, cleaner source of electricity, things like electric vehicles, hopefully running off that electricity, trying to reduce fossil fuel use, or having as much of the pollution captured as possible, trying to do things like reducing emissions in our industrial plants, our steel and cement and aluminum and some of the plastics facilities that have high emissions. And then trying to use things like our agricultural lands, our forests, our wetlands, our grasslands, or even our oceans. If there's places with bays with seagrasses or with healthy kelp or healthy reefs, using that as ways to sequester additional emissions naturally. And the idea is that if you do all those things across all those different sectors, that the overall number between the amount that you reduce and the amount that you're naturally sequestering, maybe using technology to sequester some things, that'll all balance to zero. But it's an achievable goal. I mean, most of the technologies that we need to achieve it are available, but it's really a question of the political will to make some of the tough choices to accelerate the shift towards cleaner sources of energy and less polluting vehicles and cleaner sources of cleaner industrial processes to make that promise a reality.
Well, I've got a last question, and then we got to wind this down. What do you say to the climate change myth people, the people that think it's simply a political leverage tool, that don't believe that there is climate change or that there's any seriousness to it?
Yeah, so I often ask people, what are they seeing in their hometown? Are they seeing more days over 100 degrees? Are they seeing drought conditions that folks are asking them to conserve water? Are they a part of the country that's seeing more fires, or maybe a part of the country that's seeing more floods? But rather than believing maybe what they've been what they've heard from various sources of disinformation, many of whom had a financial interest in perpetuating the status quo, kind of trust their eyes. And when I'm able to engage with folks, a lot of times they'll have a story of some extreme weather event that hit harder than anything they'd seen before, or conditions just changing, or maybe it's a species they don't see as much anymore. And I think once folks kind of think about how it's affecting them personally or their family or maybe a loved one, or whether that's close to home or another part of the country, it ends up in a very different place in the conversation, right? All of a sudden, that's not a political conversation. It's just a conversation about how do you keep people safe and how do you protect communities that we love. And often at that point, you can have a constructive conversation. But at this point, I think 10 years ago, there was a huge percentage of the country that had real questions about climate science. I mean, that percentage has shrunk down, significantly, from more than a half to, less than a third, and it'll continue to go down in the years ahead. I think the impacts are so visible at this point, it's hard to deny kind of what your eyes are seeing and what your kind of eyes are feeding into your brain. But, the scary part is that it's as rough as the last few years have been with some of these impacts in different places, they're likely going to be better than the next 10 years And again, we have to take significant action to try to reduce this. And unfortunately, a lot of the things that we've talked about on this call are all things that can create domestic jobs. Like we can manufacture a lot of these technologies here. We can create construction jobs, deploying them, create engineering jobs, operating them. So there's lots of opportunities for good paying, family-sustaining jobs. But, at the end of the day, folks that have questions, if I can get them to talk a little bit about their experience, they can often at least begin a conversation about what's causing it and what to do about it.
Well, we do have to wrap this up. My guest is Collin O'Mara, and the president and CEO of the National Wildlife Federation. Do you have a website you want to give out?
I do. So it's nwf.org, nwf.org for National Wildlife Federation. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter and all the social media platforms. And, these folks can learn all about the different things that are going on in the Hill or things they can do in their backyard with, helping monarch butterflies or, helping us bring, Ranger Rick to kids across the country. So lots of opportunities to get involved and enjoy the great outdoors and hopefully pass it on better to future generations. Ranger
Rick. I remember that as a kid. That's still around? He's still around?
Oh, yeah. We've been publishing for more than 60 years now. So, funny story.
Wow.
I know we got to wrap, but
go ahead.
When I was growing up, that was my way into conservation. And so when the headhunter was recruiting me for this position, my mom had saved every issue of Ranger Rick from 1988 or whatever to 1993 when I was of the right age, and she saved every single one of them. So I was very much a Ranger Rick kid growing up, and now we get to share it with millions of kids every year.
Well, I remember it as a kid, and I think I'm older than you, having looked at your photo. I remember him from the 70s. There was a publication of Ranger Rick. Now, who's older, Ranger Rick or Smokey the Bear?
So Smokey's actually a little older, and he's obviously a little bigger. But yeah, Smokey predates Ranger Rick by a few years. But okay. It's funny, we actually have the characters do things together occasionally. They're just two great American icons. Yeah,
certainly are. Okay, Collin. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, and best of luck with all of your endeavors with the government. I know it can't be easy.
Douglas, I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure spending a few minutes with you today.
All right, take care.